Well, thank you all so much for making time to be here today. We're really excited that our grant process is open for 2016. And as you can tell, there's been a little bit of a change to the process where usually we have 2 sessions open to the public, and we still have that very open call for applications. But given the fact that we had an agency advisory committee meeting last week with our funded partners already on the books, it was a great opportunity for us to hurry a little bit more on our end to get those application materials ready to do a separate training for that group. A lot of those agencies have been with us for multiple years, so the things that I'll go over today, and I would like to do some introductions just so I know everybody's interests and how I can best customize this. But by having that other group of current grantees that, gosh, probably know United Way better than I do, they know some more of the information that I can go more in depth into today if we need to. That just allowed us to make a better use of that time with that specific group. But ultimately, we're still open for new ideas, and really appreciate you being here today to listen and also hopefully ask questions. I think that's the thing that I've been doing this for a few years, so there might be things that seem self-explanatory to me, and I know that's always not the case. So feel free, despite we have our wonderful friends here at HCC filming, but despite that, this is very informal, so feel free to just chime in if I start talking too fast, my northern roots kick in and I go into Chicago mode and need to go over something, or if you have questions that I can better clarify. The great thing about my work is usually when we get to talking about United Way, there's always oh, I didn't know you guys did that. So hopefully there'll be maybe something that could be useful to your agency, regardless of how the funding works out. But United Way has changed a lot over the last several years, which I'm sure you've probably seen on a lot of different levels. But really the main thing has been, instead of being just a pass-through fundraising agency, have really changed to a convener of resources around specific community issues that are research-based, that also have research-based solutions, and taking a much more targeted approach to the key issue of poverty. We went through, as I'm sure in your work, you're constantly doing needs assessments to try to make sure you're focusing on the right problems, and that issue of poverty that nobody's quite been able to solve continues to be at the center of a lot of the after effects that we're seeing. Kids not being ready for school, families not having adequate savings, a lot of issues that we're seeing later down the road. And in the past, United Way has been very responsive to those issues of families not having a roof over their head, not having food on the table. But ultimately, I feel that it's in the best interest of our donors and our supporters to try to be as proactive as possible. So while basic needs, those things that you can't have a job, you can't go get a job if you don't have a place to stay, if you don't have clothes to wear to an interview, those basic needs, as we look at Maslow and all the research that shows us, we still have to make sure those basic needs are met. But how do we, not just as an organization, but a community, build a network of services that will help create more of a pipeline for folks that are ready to take that next step, ready to use that opportunity to better themselves, and hopefully be able to put ourselves out of business by preventing some of the issues that we're seeing now from occurring in the future. So that takes, since there's not one cause to poverty, that takes a lot of different safeguards or points that we can intervene along this path where folks can fall off and not have someone to help put them back on track. So since it's so complex, there's not really one issue that we can just say, oh, this is the only thing that will fix poverty, unless you all have, certainly tell us if you have any other ideas. But from what we've seen is poverty still being the core issue, but things like still our health focus is intact, because again, folks can't be self-sufficient. They can't support themselves if they don't have options for taking care of their health. Kids being school ready, we see that it's so much more costly later in life to catch them up if we don't invest early, but also maintain that investment by those supportive relationships that are going to help be a positive influence in a child's life. So that includes things like mentoring relationships, after-school programs, things that, again, ultimately for those children that are at risk, have someone else in their life, if maybe mom or dad aren't doing the things that they need to do, that can help break the cycle for that child. Ultimately, what we want to be able to do is create families that are financially independent and stable, that have an ability to increase their earnings, whether that's through additional education or a better career path, and know what to do with that money when they earn it. So having some financial education and different tools that we provide through a few different programs to be able to manage that money effectively. So that's a lot of things that we're trying to do, and the way that we do that typically is through, the bulk of it is through our community investment process, which you're here to learn about today. It is a rigorous process, and this is why we've kind of broken out a few changes this year to try to make it easier for you who are, we have a few in the room who are not currently receiving grants. We did some research last year with our partners to ask that question of how long did this take you? Because we're in the same boat as you. We know how valuable your time is. We have to have oversight and make informed decisions, but we also don't want to just needlessly be making extra work for folks that are already stretched very thin. So through that research found that some of our new grantees, we might have been able to vet some ideas prior to submission of a full application. So we'll look at what that means for the process this year. But typically it is we've got over 900 hours invested in the process by the time we get done. And it is a very difficult decision. There's typically 60 to 70% of funding available to meet all the requests that we receive. So that means, unfortunately, sometimes decreases happen for our current grantees, or sometimes we're not able to take on all the new programs that we are hoping for. But we're really happy last year that we actually did take on several new partners that were aligned in key areas of our community impact strategy. A lot of new partners on the area of early childhood. So there are currently 34 funded programs from 24 different agencies. As I mentioned, several of those were new. So that's, we've grown in terms of the number of programs and agencies we work with every year for the last, at least since I've been around. This is my fourth or fifth allocation cycle. And as Julia mentioned, a new program just coming on in the last few years. So I think while we are trying to still be more focused, I think we're very open, as opposed to some United Ways have a very closed process. Ours is very much, here's where we're trying to go. If you can help us get there, let's talk about what that could look like. So just some guidance I would give in general when you're writing grants, which I'm sure you guys do this all the time, so doing research on what your funder's currently funding is one of your best steps if you're looking at a new proposal. So what I would recommend is, I'll show you on our website as well and can happily send these slides to you. That's why we asked for your email address. Can send you this, but there's also more information about these programs on our website, and I would encourage you to look at what we're currently funding, and I will go into a little bit more detail on things that we've seen gravitate well with our community investment team to give you an idea, because again, I think that's the question that we all have today is this a good fit for my agency or program? So hopefully learning a little bit more about those initiatives will be beneficial. Other things that we're doing that might be able to benefit you outside of our grant process. We have several different collaborations with other agencies, things like Give a Day for Hunger, where we mobilize volunteers to provide extra bags of food for children over the spring break period, and now it's expanded to fall break. So that's something that came to us really as a question from the community, and I think a great example of if there's an unmet need, we're happy to mobilize people however we can to help. Bank On Central Kentucky, that is a program run by United Way here locally. We provide trained volunteer instructors to teach financial education classes, primarily any place that we know there's a need. We're doing a lot more in substance abuse centers, we still have the model of host a class for the community and kind of hope folks show up, which usually they do, but we've been doing much more targeted work of the detention center, places that we know have a need, and they reach out to us and we'll send in a trained volunteer instructor. So we've had several hundred folks go through that training this year, and really excited. We have one happening with our first faith-based partnership over at All Nations Worship Ministries coming up, and we're expecting a pretty large group. So it's been wonderful that is a program that we can recruit and train folks that can expand our reach with a very low cost, but still some really good outcomes that we're able to track. That also provides access to second chance accounts to clients who maybe have had bad credit or bad history with the mainstream financial institution and are relying on predatory or some kind of lending practice that's not helping them build credit. So that's another thing that we're trying to achieve by that, is not just teaching folks some skills, but opening up some opportunities to them if they're willing to achieve that level of education. So can give you much more information on that if that's something your agency would like to bring in. And that's at no cost to any of our partners. Day of Action, that is something that we'll be offering. We've offered several years now. It's a region-wide day of service, and we'll mobilize volunteers with you, and anything you also would like to do to promote it on your end is welcome. But over 200 volunteers came out last year to service projects across all 5 of our counties. So that's a wonderful opportunity as well. If you just need, gosh, I know, like, we need some light bulbs changed in here. If you need some data entry, if you need whatever it is that you need, we'll do a call out for projects here probably in the spring, early summer. It's usually held in June, and I believe we're looking at June 21st is usually the day that it's held across United Way networks, and we try to stick with that as much as possible. So it will likely be around that date again this year. So certainly if that's something we can do to help you, just let us know what you need, and we'll let people know what you need, and usually when people know what's needed, they respond. So we'd be happy to help. AmeriCorps Vista, we have several folks with Vista ties actually in the room, which is exciting, and we have a representative from CASA. Do you want to introduce for us just a minute?
Hi, I'm Debbie Smith. I've been with CASA since they started back in '09, and I was a Vista for a year before being on staff with CASA, and I'm now serving as the interim director. Our director just retired, and so I'm the interim right now, so learning curve.
So a lot of folks know what Vista is, but I didn't actually, honestly, till I started working with the program. I should have done it myself. But essentially, we work with volunteers like Darla who serve a year long term or more, as Darla's been with us multiple years, building the capacity of nonprofits to fight poverty. So the great thing from an agency perspective is you get an opportunity to grow or establish programs that align with those outcomes around poverty eradication at a much lower cost than a full traditional staff member. So a pretty complex program because it does have federal ties, but certainly if that's something you'd like to learn more about, we have our Vista program director, and I can try to answer any questions you might have off the bat if it could be a good fit. But that's half of our team here is Vistas, so we could not do what we do without their support. They're all up, hopefully up there listening. They're working so hard, but they're wonderful. They make things like all of our volunteer work really happen. That's where it comes together. Things like Project United, which we were able to take out to Grayson County this year and do a renovation of their new space that they were moving into, and just needed a little bit of manpower and people coordinating and connecting to make that happen. We also have launched a new program in partnership with Helping Hand of Hope, something that's been successful in other communities called VITA, because also having the Vista program, that's not going to be confusing at all. Having VITA and Vista both run out of here, but it stands for Volunteer Income Tax Assistance, and this is another instance where we recruit and train volunteers. Actually, you don't have to have a financial background to prepare taxes. Just take some training that we've been able to provide with the IRS. So we've had several folks already, since this program just launched last week, come in and get their taxes done for free, with the goal of making sure that working families who qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit, 4 out of 5 working families take advantage of that, but that means there's 1 in 5 that's missing out on usually several hundred up to $6,000 that they could use as a safety net. And again, with Bank On, using that as an opportunity to get them a savings account and helping them develop a spending plan for when that happens. So that's a great asset. myfreetaxes.com, if someone doesn't want to come in person to have that done, that's also something we can make available through United Way worldwide. And again, none of these are at any cost to your agency. United Way Born Learning Academies, that's some work we've been able to do with, again, United Way worldwide on early childhood. So probably not as of interest in terms of hosting, since most of these come through school districts. But if you have families that need some help with parenting or things that their children need to know to be successful in kindergarten, I've taken my own children to this and it helped us tremendously. At the very least, it's a free meal once a month and you get a lot of great education and books to take home. It's just a wonderful program. And there's 7 locations that we have offering this throughout our region. So all the schedule for that is on our website. There's also some poverty simulation opportunities. Those kind of vary depending on what time of year, but certainly if you'd like some kind of, we have templates for different exercises, even that you can do with your boards or volunteers to try to help them sometimes understanding the challenges that you're trying to address. Just getting everybody to understand that challenge in the first place can be a challenge. So certainly let us know if there's anything we can help with that conversation on poverty and opportunity. And finally, we're working to help expand 211 to our area, which is the statewide non-emergency hotline for folks in need. So the benefit that we see to that, currently United Way is kind of serving in this capacity. We took over 100 calls to our office the last 3 months of 2015. So a lot of people don't realize that we kind of serve that need now of people that need help and don't know where to go or have been everywhere and need some other ideas or just some other options. We can't provide direct financial assistance, so this is our way of making sure that folks know, regardless of, you don't have to give to United Way to use this, it's just the right thing for us to do. So we pick up those calls when we receive them. But we're hoping to be able to make 211 available statewide. We're one of the few states that don't have it, but it will be a great opportunity for your programs, your information to be in this centralized database so that we can also not only better coordinate our services, there's a back end of this system where we can actually pull data and see what the calls are about, where they're coming from. It maps all of this in real time. So really exciting stuff that if you hopefully hear more about it as it comes out, we'll let you know as we're able to roll that out. There's a lot of different questions as well that I left in here, some things that might just help you to understand about how United Way works. If you have worked with another United Way, what makes us different, some things, again, like the phone numbers piece about our call opportunities. Just questions that we know people have and we want to make sure they have the answers to. All of these are available on our website. We have is a lot, I think, that would actually be beneficial for you about the grant process and what our folks, our evaluators looking for, how does that process work. I'll explain again as much as I possibly can today, but I would encourage you, that's available on our blog, also on our website, which I can show you where that's at momentarily. So any questions kind of about United Way in general before we start looking at application information? All right. I'll just first take us through the packet that you have in front of you, because this will give us, we're just going to go as big as a picture as possible to get started and then kind of narrow down into the details as we get a little bit further. So we've talked a little bit about United Way today, kind of where we're going, where we were in the past, where we're going in the future. The biggest thing I think that is relevant for you to understand about our work is our focus areas. So typically it sounds like the agencies that you represent, there's nothing that I'm hearing that I'm like, you know, it's animal welfare, or it's the arts. You know, there's sometimes things that are great causes that we could try to support through, again, one of those other opportunities that I mentioned. But typically our grants are focused on the areas of education, financial stability, health, or basic needs. There's a little bit more information in your packet about kind of why we're moving toward that more focused approach. But the thing I think that's notable for you is the issue of outcomes. Last year was our first year with some kind of common measurement framework. So we can say, here's what we're looking for, here's what we're looking to achieve, and again, back to that, here's what we want to do, and if you can do this, that's what we want to be able to get done. Those priorities, as we call them, are on education and financial stability. We have a couple areas that I can walk through. We do have some common outcomes identified, but we still are very open. That means health and basic needs. You essentially propose your own outcomes in your application. So that means we're not full scale, everybody using same common outcomes and measurements, but last year was our first year with a step in that direction. So that was big for us. We were really excited about it, but I share that it is still kind of new for us. So I don't think anybody has it completely perfect. It's not totally figured out across the board. We still have a couple agencies measuring things in slightly different ways. So while that is important, it's part of a step towards progress. It's a step in a direction we're going. So certainly I think that's where I see the most questions is, do I fit into one of these categories? And that's where I think we want to give as much direction as possible, but I think there's also still a little bit of flexibility as we move that transition into trying to be as consistent as possible in our measurements across programs. So one thing that is sometimes a surprise to people is United Way, actually, we are the facilitator of this process. So myself as staff, I actually don't have a vote. You can take me to lunch still and a cup of coffee or whatever, but I'd like to be very upfront that our process is really to help you as applicants put forward the best, most detailed, or most compelling application as possible, and then train our allocations team and give them all the tools they need to make an informed decision. So we really facilitate this process that is ultimately the recommendation that comes from our allocations committee, which is all volunteer. That happens and is approved by our board of directors. So again, that's where I can answer as many questions as possible because my job is to ask everybody questions. I'll be asking the allocations team on the other side as many questions as possible too, and kind of keeping track of everything as it's happening in the deliberations. So sometimes folks are, have questions about that or surprised to know it's not, United Way staff doesn't just read the proposals and decide. The eligibility for funding, we'll go through this a little bit more in terms of the documentation that's needed. We do have a checklist that will outline that in more detail. But the good news is we're talking right now, so you've already met your first thing we ask of you, which is to attend one of these grant training sessions. And again, hopefully, I hope this will be helpful. Our goal is to help put forward the best applications to our committee. So that's where we just like to everybody have kind of the same starting point so it can make good use of that volunteer's time. We do ask that you serve at least one of the counties in our service area, which is Hardin, Breckenridge, Grayson, LaRue, and Meade counties. So no, you do not have to serve all of them, but at least you can be a more regional program or a statewide program. But I would say that there does need to be some proof of service happening in one of those counties, at least one of those. So can talk more about that if you have any questions. Aligning with the focus areas, which we've talked about. Ideally, if you have outcomes that align with the education or financial stability priorities, those are listed in your packet if you want to peek ahead, but we do ask to have alignment with one of our focus areas. You do need to be a nonprofit, school district, or coalition of agencies with a nonprofit fiscal agent. And that is a change that just came last year as we're open to, if there's multiple agencies, as in the case of our Early Childhood Council here in Hardin County. That was a funded partner for the first time last year, which is made up, it's not, I couldn't go to their office necessarily. The Early Childhood Council is 10, 15 agencies all working together with common outcomes. So that's a little bit of a different structure that we were able to open up and be accessible for last year. We do ask for good governance because it's important for our donors and supporters to know that the dollars are being not only invested wisely, but they're being handled to the highest standard. So some of the things that'll be on that checklist, looking for 990s, audits, board, not just who's on your board, but showing that it's active, things like that. That United Way, we're also accountable for answering those same questions in multiple reviews that we go through each year. So we ask the same thing of our funded programs, and we have great partnerships with some agencies that are larger or have a national affiliation, but also much smaller organizations that are all volunteer run. So I think we have high expectations, but we've been able to implement that whether or not it's a larger or a smaller agency. We're open to both of those different kinds of structures. We do have a memorandum of agreement, which I'll go through shortly. We ask that to be turned in with your grant materials, so just so we can verify that you understand what that means. Before several years ago, we had you turn in the MOA after the funding decision was made, and we just didn't want it to be like, okay, now here's the money, and now here's all the stuff you have to do. This way, it's up front. You can see again whether it's a good fit or whether there's something else that we should be working on together. The thing that we ask of all of our partners and are going to continue asking is continued recognition of the investment of United Way through co-branding opportunities and anything that we can do to help the public understand where those dollars go, because that is one of the biggest challenges that we face is trying to raise the largest privately funded fundraising campaign in our community. Trying to help folks understand where those dollars ended up is just so important, because whether you donate $1 a week or $10,000, it can be difficult sometimes to know where that went if you're not seeing it on the program level. So we'll give you all the tools you need. We'll give you examples here shortly, but that's really helpful for us in letting folks know proactively, here's the results and the things that were accomplished with those dollars. Kind of went through some things that we don't typically fund. It sounds like there's nothing I'm concerned about off the top of my head. One thing that sometimes we get asked about is religious organizations, and we do have some organizations that have a religious component to them that are receiving funding, but that does come with a stipulation that services need to be provided regardless of religious background. So we do just allow that, but keeping in mind that that can't be a criteria to approve or deny services for a client. There's some great frequently asked questions in here. I think most of these we'll kind of address in our conversation today, but feel free. What I recommended this to our current grantees, and I'll recommend it here as well, is before you start working on anything, read through this, and then if you get to the process where all your materials are complete, before you turn it in, even go back and look at it and just make sure that there wasn't something that maybe didn't jump out before you'd gone through the writing and submission and everything. Take another look at it before you turn everything in. Some feedback from our past applications. This is something that we've not seen from many other funders, but we feel is really important to give to those who not only write and are approved for their grants, but maybe haven't been approved in the past. We give feedback as much as possible. Actually, any grantee that applies or applicant that applies receives written feedback from our CIT. So even if you applied last year and we overall invested in the program, we're happy with it. Just about everybody had some suggestions for, here's something you can maybe think about for next year. Here's maybe an underlying question that the CIT's had for a while and hasn't been totally clear on. So we believe honestly, yes, it does take some time and effort for us to put those together for 34 different programs or more than that potentially. But we feel it's really important to help strengthen your organizations, and by giving that feedback, that's something that could potentially be used, whether it's to apply for United Way in the future or just help inform your proposals to other funders. So again, we really want to strengthen your capacity, and that's why we have things like outcomes and reporting, tracking certain things, not just for United Way of Central Kentucky. There's a lot of different applications and ways you can use that information if there's that structure. Good, better, otherwise, I hate to say imposed, but when there is that need for structure on our behalf, it's something that can also help strengthen your work moving forward. So I can read these to you all, but I think the thing that would probably be best use of your time, again, I would look at this specifically when your proposal is done and kind of go through and just check and see if you've hit on these major issues that we see on some level typically from year to year. questions and technical assistance, we offer to any applicant the opportunity to talk one-on-one with myself or sit down in person with a phone call. Again, I can never tell you here's exactly what to apply for, here's how to put it, here's what outcomes to use, but I essentially will ask you questions until you feel like this is the best way to tell the story of your program. And since I a lot of times have a blank slate if I don't, especially the newer folks in the room, I'm going to have hopefully some good questions because I don't know as much about your programs, and I can provide some feedback before it goes to the CIT. Again, I can't tell you exactly. I wouldn't be informed enough to make those decisions for you, but I can ask some questions to potentially let you kind of consider some things that I know are typically issues that the CIT looks at from year to year. I do ask just as if you need that support, just give me as much notice as possible, since this is the time of year where everyone is taking up on that offer. So the more flexibility you have in your schedule, or if there's an opportunity to do that via email, I've reviewed proposals electronically and shot back some questions for folks. So again, my goal is to help you put forward the best case for your program and make the CIT's decision as difficult as possible. So I feel like I've done my job when they have a really hard time deciding. They will have you'll have a little bit of a different change this year to the process for new applicants. In your packet, you have the full timeline of everything everybody's doing, so you can kind of see the big picture of how this works. The dates you need to worry about, you don't need to worry about now, February 2nd, that's off your list. If you are submitting a new program, so even if you're a current grantee who wants to add a new program or apply for something different, or you've not received funding this current year and would like to have an opportunity to do so this year, we have a shorter version of the application that will allow us to kind of hit the highlights of what you're looking for, and that will be submitted and reviewed electronically by our CIT. They'll take a look at that. Everybody will be using a standard. It's not like a letter of intent where everybody's are going to be different. There'll be the standard format, which actually uses questions from the full application. So if you get the green light to go ahead and submit that full proposal, you can use that as the foundation for what you're going to submit in that bigger application. But we don't want to, our goal is not to make you jump through multiple hoops, but saw the opportunity to give you a quicker answer of, yes, this sounds like something that would align, that we'd be interested in learning more about. So hopefully that helps be more respectful of your time if you'd like to enter that process. We'll let you know. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I have a question. If you are a returning applicant who's received funding, but you're making a change to the program?
So that's the questions I've had around this have been like how big a change means a new program. So for example, we have one program that's changing the demographics. They're going to expand into a different school. They're going to work with a different age child. That's not really a fundamental change to that program. So we didn't see that as significant enough to say, yes, it's still achieving the same outcome. It's just for a little bit of a different segment of kids. Okay. So that's where it's going to be probably a little bit more specific. If you want to let me know, here's what I'm thinking. I can give you some guidance on if it's so drastic that it would need some kind of review first, but changes in location that aren't really going to affect what we're focused on is that result. And if that result is staying the same, then I don't think you would need to go through that separate process. Okay. But we can talk more about that with specifics if that would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah.
When in doubt, you can totally override me and still send it in separately anyway. But yeah, again, we don't want to make folks go through too much extra work if it's still fairly consistent from what was funded in the past year. We will let you know by February 26th if we're looking for the full application, and then you still have about a month from that point with the due date happening on March 22nd. We'll go through what you need to turn in when that happens, but my ask right now, and everybody's been really great about listening to it the last few years, is pretend the 22nd doesn't exist, like call it March 20th. Don't wait till the 22nd because I've been there. I've been submitting a grant like at 11 o'clock the night it's due, and nobody wins when that happens. Your internet will go out. Your printer will go out. It's Murphy's Law. It really will. I wouldn't be saying that if I hadn't personally dropped the ball myself in a few of those situations where it's just going to be the weird thing that you weren't counting on happening. The good news is you know where our office is. I've even been recommending that if you've not been to our office, sometimes GPSs get funky. And so the good news is you know where we are, and we'll be accepting those applications until 2 o'clock that day. We've not had to turn any away, but we honestly will shut the doors and lock up and compile everything as of 2 o'clock. So that is a firm deadline. And there is an electronic copy that we're looking for, and I'll show you that on the checklist. But turning in that electronic copy doesn't count for having that in our hands because as you'll see here, we turn those around pretty quickly. We actually gave ourselves, honestly, a few more days than we typically do because that's one of the most stressful. Usually we get it out in about 48 hours into the hands of our allocations team, and we did give ourselves a little bit more wiggle room because we have to compile all of these into packets that we can physically just hand over to over 20 volunteers. So we've got a little bit of a cushion there for ourselves at United Way, but we do try to put those out for review as quick as possible. So that's why we have a deadline and we need to stick to it. From that point, the things that you need to worry about, the CIT will be involved in, they'll have some training as well on the other side. We'll hand off the applications to them at the end of March. They will also be having a separate, a new addition to the process this year is a review by a finance team. They'll be looking at the overall soundness and things like reviewing the audits and just looking for organizational and governance potential issues are reflected on the dollar side of things. So they'll be reviewing that independently. The CIT will also be asking questions. We'll have a Q&A session for you that during their review, the CIT will keep track of anything that wasn't really clear or things, for agencies that are current partners, if you were not turning in reports on time, there's things that they might have some questions about and just want to clarify with you. So the good news is you'll have an opportunity to address any of those questions in person on May 5th. So typically what happens is we block off that entire day for, it's the longest one we've got, honestly, for our volunteers, because we will do Q&As with, like I said, 34 programs. Every program has some time dedicated to be able to answer questions as specifically as possible. And so it's a long day, but we'll make sure that we get everybody in at some point on May 5th. I can't tell you what specific time yet when you would go, because we base how much time you get off of how many applicants we have. So if we totally scare everybody off and we only have 20 applicants, you're going to get potentially a longer time. Gosh, I hope that doesn't happen. I should have picked a better number, but we hopefully would not have 20 applicants, but you would theoretically get a longer time as opposed to if we have 40 programs we need to review, it would be much shorter. So typically we go alphabetically. I think we've tried to flip-flop it from year to year, so you're not always getting folks when they're tired and have been listening at the end of the day every single year. And we try to think about little things like that as much as possible. So we will let you know once we have all of those applications in hand. We'll start working on the schedule for May 5th. But right now, I would just put that on your schedules as a hold on the day as much as you can. And something that potentially you can bring your finance people, you can bring whoever you think is best equipped to answer their questions. We do provide those to you in advance with a little bit more time as well than we have in past years, so you can have some time to research if there is a financial question or something you might not fully know about. Trying to think other things that help the folks that I've seen be most successful in the Q&A session, even if they only give you like a question, so you've wrote a solid proposal, the folks that I think have used that opportunity the best, because you're talking with the decision makers directly, is to not use it just as a chance to, here's my program, here's what we do. They've already read your application, so they have a pretty solid, hopefully by that point, understanding of your agency and what you're asking for. But I think on some level, all of us have those, and that's why I shared some of our frequently asked questions, so you could kind of use that as a brainstorming opportunity. We all have those questions of, you're a more regional program. What are you doing in this county? Or what specifically are you doing connected to this focus area? There's things that might not be United Way related, but questions that you probably get about your work, or that if only everybody understood. In my opinion, at least at United Way, we have a few things like that you're like, it'd be just great if everyone understood how this worked. And I'm sure I'm seeing some heads nodding. Hopefully that means I think all agencies have that to some degree. So I would be strategic with that time and use it to address maybe those underlying things that, I didn't know that question, or I didn't know to ask that maybe formally in the process. But I think it would help get at underlying issues or concerns that maybe the CIT doesn't know they have until they kind of get it brought out through your being proactive and bringing up those issues. And it is there's a lot of dialogue, so they could ask some follow-ups from that. I wouldn't be too scared about, oh my gosh, what are they going to ask? I think questions are a good thing. When you can get them asking questions, you should feel good about that. So hopefully, and I can certainly answer questions specifically about how I've seen those go, but generally the ones I think that are most successful use it as an opportunity to really talk and ferret out, again, questions maybe the CIT didn't realize they had until they got in the room. Yeah, Kate.
Are they going to have the strict timer like they did past years?
Yeah, there'll be a time limit. The very first year we did it, you got 5 minutes. So we're better than that now. We've kind of worked into our schedule the full day. In the first year, we only did it for a half day Q&A. So I had that job, I think, of like cutting people off. I was like, this is not, so just to get my own self out of the hot seat when people would talk to me again. I think it was 10 minutes last year. We did it per program. So again, if you had multiple programs from your agency, you could have time and you weren't penalized essentially to try to get in more in less or the same amount of time. I just don't know how much time that will be. That's exactly what we base off of. If we have 8 hours to get these in, we work backwards to determine how much time everybody gets based on how many applicants we have. So that's where I don't know how long it's going to be and exactly what time you're going to go yet. Is that helpful? Sorry, we'll know that pretty soon once they all come in. As soon as that's probably as soon as we get them out the door, that'll be the next thing we start working on once the CIT has them. Excuse me, my voice does not hold up terribly well. I yell at my kids too much. The CIT then from that point on, it's out of your hands. There's nothing more you got to worry about. And there'll be a few more CIT meetings. And again, I'll emphasize these are volunteers that are taking time. Usually their companies have to be behind giving them the time or letting them take leave to be here. So that's why we care so much about making this a good experience for them, because they'll spend one full day for 3 weeks in a row deliberating with the goal of by that last meeting on May 19th, we'll have a decision. And that decision will go to the board for their recommendation on May 27th. So as quick as we can get all the decision letters compiled, typically what we will do is let you know as quick as possible. Will be by end of the month, end of May 2016. The feedback might take a little bit more time. That seems to be the case, or we think you want to know, good, bad, or otherwise, pretty quick. If we put everybody's CIT feedback that is kind of where we pulled out from in the packet. If we did that all at the same time, it would delay your notification. So typically there will be a separate letter that comes out. So just know that might happen so we can get you that answer quicker. We start the grant year then right away, June 1st. We'll get your checks in the mail by June 15th. From there are a few other dates that are important, and if you forget them today, it's not the end of the world. We will do a training for you. We have quarterly agency advisory committee meetings. That's where we pull together all of the representatives from all of our programs, and we do on a quarterly basis talk. This last one, that was the one I was just referring to. We did the grant training on the application, but we'll talk about different things, issues that folks are having, other training that United Way needs to provide, just anything that might be of use to our funded partners. So we'll do a session on how to report for the coming year. That will be the very first thing we do at our next meeting for the new grant year. But we do have the dates for those reports to be due. End of September, based on the calendar. The next one to be due end of December, and that just be mean to do to you guys. And honestly, I'm not going to read your reports at the end of December and the new year. So we gave a little bit of extra time for that to be due closer to mid-month of January. We don't like to, I think hopefully you will find that we're a very agency-friendly organization because we get it, we're in your same boats as well on other grants and dealing with other funders. So we don't like to ask you for things that we're not going to use or that we're not going to use on a timely basis. So it is really important that those come in when they're due because we do some now reporting back to the community with the results from those reports. So having them on time is really important. And the CIT does see, they will get a report of who's been where, who's done what they were supposed to in the MOA, very cut and dry, like literally here's when they turned it in and they can see what was late. So it's not, we try to keep it with as little room for personal influence as possible and very objective, but that is something that they see in their review process. So there might be some questions for current grantees based on some of those things that they'll see in the process. In terms of how do you know whether or not your program aligns, there is some opportunity in here to get suggestions on things that we're looking for with those specific focus areas. We do have, as I mentioned, a framework for measuring 2 priorities under education and 2 under financial stability. But if you do not fit under those, we haven't closed the doors to those opportunities. So I think that's going to be the most confusing part until we actually look at it in the application, and I think it'll make a little bit more sense once we look at how this translates into what you actually apply for. But these are some outcomes and things that we're essentially looking for and that you still have the opportunity to be able to propose on your own if you do not fall into one of those pre-selected uniform outcomes. The framework that we do and have been using for the outcomes conversation is called results-based accountability. And it's much more flexible, I hope you'll find, than like a logic model. It's, I think, very adaptable. There's a lot of different ways that we could go about this, but the thing that that's the one good, bad, or otherwise that we've been working from. And if that does not ring any kind of bell, which honestly it didn't to me until I started learning about it, we do have a lot of resources on our for nonprofits at UWCK.org. There's a tab here called Resources and Training. And there is a lot that you'll hopefully find that could be beneficial. Again, even if you say this is not the right fit from a funding standpoint, feel free. There's some opportunities that, based on the feedback that our partners give us, we try to go out and provide as many opportunities to give you this training free of charge. So thanks to the great folks over at ECTC, for example, we've been able to arrange free Excel training because we do a lot on our budget. You'll see shortly uses an Excel format. Our reporting uses Excel, and it actually has some great applications for things like tracking your volunteer service, other budgets that you might need to do. So we heard just that there are a lot of volunteers or other staff at agencies that might need either a refresher course or a more in-depth training on this. So we've been able to offer, it looks like the February dates have just started here in E-Town, but some Litchfield classes and then some other E-Town classes later this spring. So there's information on how to register for those free of charge, and feel free to let us know if you have any questions about that. There are resources. We had a trainer come in and provide a whole day of trainings for partners back in January of 2014 on results-based accountability. His name was Dan Duncan, and we have all the materials from his visit still available on our website, as well as a new webinar he has coming up on just kind of an overview of it that's available starting in February, or this one date in February. I don't know whether or not he'll make the recording public, and if he does, we'll put it up here too. But he did anything that he had from his training when he was here, we've kept up here, as well as just some other things that we love using, like Doodle and You Can Book Me and Free Conference Call. So anything that you come across too that you're like, this is the coolest thing, it helps me be so much more productive, or it gives us great ideas, just let us know. We'd love to let more folks know about like this one here saves us so much money and effort sometimes in coordinating schedules for different meetings. So feel free to let us know if there's something you think we should add. Sorry, this is so weird, this dual screen thing. Okay, back at this one. I do like to leave in here, there's some things that we talk about with our CIT, and I like you to be able to see what we're telling them, so that way you can get a little bit of insight into what they're looking for. Typically, the CIT is very focused on that local component of our work, as well as how agencies are able to leverage funds to provide a greater value in their programs. So things like the community health clinic, for example, does a lot to recruit and utilize the strengths of physicians and folks with that higher skill level. Legal aid, similarly, we're granting, in some cases, a very small amount of money, but the return that that's having in terms of the hours served or the services provided, that is something that we're really, really interested in, and I think really gravitate towards programs that can demonstrate that type of value or return on that investment. Another thing I've seen that seems to gravitate with the community investment team is our programs that kind of similar to that recruit and train volunteers to expand the impact of that work. Also are providing a more wraparound type of approach to their families. Some programs have more of a distribution, here it is, you can come get it approach to delivering services, and I think we'll, things like food, that's hard to have a more wraparound model for something like that, but I think we're gravitating towards services that, and I think CASA is a great example of that, where there is somebody with that family, in your case that volunteer that you're placing with that child, but that also has a picture of what's going on in that entire family. So if, you know, some dad's needing to do some things educationally or to get his eligibility back for his kids, that there's somebody kind of keeping that on the radar, keeping that moving forward and connecting them with the services that they need. There's somebody there if, you know, someone needs referrals to healthcare or education. It's not just different programs that we're all operating unconnected, but there's somebody that has essentially the scorecard or the game plan for that particular client and their family. So I think that's something, that method of delivering services that's been very appealing and attractive, because we've seen, you know, through great folks like your work, we're seeing impacts on other levels of the family, maybe not just that one child, but we're seeing that be able to address multiple issues that are going on in that household. So I think that's really exciting. We love seeing those kinds of proposals, and I think there's a lot of innovative ways that kind of outcome or result can be achieved. So those are just some things to keep in mind that have been, I think, really compelling when our CIT sees those kinds of proposals. This is something I would, in addition to that page of questions or feedback from previous applicants, this is another page I would kind of hit once you've gone through and written your application. I'd come back here and just kind of see, did I hit or have somebody that knows your spouses or partners or family or friends. If you don't have that person that you forced to read all of your work before you submit it, my poor husband has read too many grant applications, but picking somebody who knows nothing about what you're asking for and that could look at these questions and go through and see where the ties are in your application and make sure they're addressed. I think it's great to have that other set of eyes that can look at this as a CIT member, because I also share our CIT as our volunteers. We have all of our counties represented. We'll have somebody with a local perspective from each of those, but we try to have as broad a perspective of healthcare, financial institutions, nonprofits, retirees. We try to have as broad a perspective as possible, which also on the flip side of that means don't assume that you're talking to people who just pretend nobody knows anything about what you're talking about. They're very, very smart people, but the issues I've seen sometimes come from an expectation that they knew something that they didn't. So I think they would, if they were sitting here, they'd say, just treat us like we absolutely know nothing in acronyms, why something, maybe a source of funding would be not an option for you, or why United Way funding. I think that's something we're always trying to understand is, why do you need our funding specifically? What other options out there are or are not available? Sometimes it can be kind of seem obvious to us when we get in our nonprofit tunnel vision, but if you're literally explaining this to folks that might work in a bank 40 hours a week. So again, that's where if you have somebody that you can throw this at that would come from that perspective of, have your mom read it, or somebody that will ask you some questions and say, I don't get what you're talking about here, that doesn't make sense. I think that's a really great part of your internal process to put it through. So again, that might impact what deadline you set for yourself to try to have that happen before our due date, but I just can't recommend that enough. We do it internally on any proposal that we submit, just because you'll catch things that way that you might not otherwise. At the end here is the measurement framework for the priority areas that we have. As I mentioned, there's 2 under education and 2 under financial stability. So health and basic needs, you propose, here's what you're going to do with the money. Here's the results you're going to achieve. It's going to be so many people impacted, so many of the outcome that you can propose. If what I recommend to agencies that aren't sure whether or not where they fall is to look first at the outcomes, worrying a little bit less about exact. In terms of definitions, the one thing we're looking for an early. Is anybody thinking of early childhood here? Because I can skip that part if not. Okay, sounds like I can skip this piece, but really more of what we're looking for is that end outcome. So if you have a slightly different way of how you measure it, I'll show you where that can translate in the application. But if you're seeing that your program aligns with, you don't have to have all of these outcomes, but you do need at least one that your program would be addressing or be able to show some measurable change in. So if you see that there's one, this is where you're doing this, but you're not sure you're measuring it the same way, let's talk, because I think there could be some flexibility. I would hate to see a program that I think could be something we aggregate as an organization in terms of our results and the things we're trying to do. If it's being measured slightly differently, I think there's a way that could still be worked into the application without having to go about proposing your own outcomes that would be ultimately very similar to this. Our other one in education, caring and supportive relationships. So again, that's where we get some questions sometimes is if your age is slightly different, I think we're open to, if you're with 4th graders or if it's slightly different, but again, we're achieving some of these outcomes. I think that's the decision ultimately that the CIT can judge is this achieving this outcome that we're specifically looking for? If not, if it's measured just slightly different, or if the target population is really the CIT deems as too different, I don't think you're losing anything in the deliberation process. They're still obviously looking at, it might fall into a different bucket from that standpoint. But I think I would look, if you are working on one of these outcomes, trying to use those as much as possible. Similarly, our pathways to financial security on financial stability is about improving financial knowledge and management, specifically by enhancing participants' or clients' financial knowledge, moving them to mainstream financial services, improving their overall financial position, and improving their savings. And again, not all of these have to be, you need at least one from this column and one from this column as to how you're going to measure it. And this, I promise this will make more sense once we show you actually how to pick and where to pick from. The other piece of that is the finding jobs and pursuing career growth. So that means getting new skills or recognized credentials. Participants becoming job ready. job placement rates or clients that are improving the quality of their job. So moving to a higher paying job or some kind of situation that's going to help them longer term. We also have an interest in the issue of transportation as it pertains to education and employment. So if you have any kinds of programs that are removing that transportation barrier that, again, are having this end outcome of increasing access to education, employment, by helping folks increase their level of education, becoming job ready, receiving new jobs that are going to allow them to move up in terms of how much they're earning, and also participants that are able to own or own their own vehicle. We've got how we're defining that here. So that will open up a lot of other opportunities to them. Any questions on kind of overall what we're looking for in terms of outcomes? I can explain a little bit more how that translates here in just a minute. Okay, so that is the packet. The application itself is available on our website. And that is back under for nonprofits and grant opportunities. So what you need to do for applying for a grant, we have the new applicant section here, which basically just said, we have this new partner application, here's who to email it to, and here's when. We'll go ahead and first I'm gonna skip us around just a little bit though, and begin with the checklist. So you can see before you go into what you want to apply for, just making sure that this is something that you would be eligible for or have the documentation needed to be able to provide. So with your application, we ask for you to bring in a copy of this review checklist. Make sure, essentially, when you turn in things that it's all there. United Way, we will have somebody from our team checking it, but a disclaimer is that, as I mentioned, we have wonderful vistas. We've got staff that is all over the place doing some great things, but we all have very different schedules. So you likely will not be turning it in to me personally. It'll be okay. They'll have some training as well on here's how to make sure everything is there. But I share that disclaimer with, it seemed like a few years ago people had specific questions that they were hoping I could answer. Again, I just assume that the person looking at this knows nothing other than they're gonna make sure it's there. This is probably not the time for how many copies of this did I need, or should I have done a separate budget, things like that, when it's coming in, hopefully before the 2 o'clock on the 22nd. Any questions like that we can answer well ahead of that time, but likely won't be an option if it's coming in at the last minute that day. So the things that we ask to come in with your application, on the application itself, you certify that you're serving at least one of the counties in our service area. We also need a copy of your most recent IRS 990. And the kind of footnote that goes with this is that there are some agencies that aren't legally required to submit a 990. Typically those are ones who are not 501c3s, your school districts, other like a coalition of agencies might not be subject to that requirement. So what we ask is if you legally don't have to file that, if you can give us something that says you don't need to and here's why. That might be from your accountant, from your finance person. Just if it doesn't apply, let us know, because again, you might be turning this into an AmeriCorps Vista who's never done this before, and honestly, like I don't have enough of the law or finance background to know all of the different degrees of when somebody may or may not need to or may fall into this requirement. So if you don't think you do, just please give us something so we can understand why, as opposed to it's just not here and we're going to make you scramble and think we can't accept the application if that's not in the packet. So just let us know if that's something you're not required to provide. Okay, so I'm just going to scroll this way instead. The audit, that is, if you do not have currently an audit in place, that's okay. You can still apply for United Way funding. That process changed last year, I believe was the first year we allowed applications. But know that if you have a current audit, please do turn that in so we can review that. You are still eligible to apply, but we do ask if you have it already in hand from your last fiscal year to go ahead and turn it in. If you do not currently have an audit, you'll be required to do so in the course of the upcoming grant year. If you are in excess of $250,000 of revenue as an agency, or if you are requesting $100,000 or more in United Way funding. That recently changed to try to be, again, more flexible and user-friendly to our agencies, so you're not spending as much of your dollars on an audit, which can run, I think ours is about $7,000. So we know that that's expensive. We don't take it lightly, but again, we also have an obligation to our investors and to our supporters to know that those dollars are being managed well. So those will be reviewed, and we do ask that if you are under that threshold, the agency still needs to certify that there are proper internal controls in place so we can know that those dollars will be handled safely. If you don't know how much your revenue is, we tell you where to find it. It's in your I did it again this year. See that in there, 900? I was supposed to change that from last year. When I did this training last year, I couldn't believe I did it and I missed revising it. In your 990, I apologize, it says 900 there. It's in your 990. If you have a Form 900, I have no idea what form that would be. In Part 8, line 12, column A, that's kind of the uniform measurement that we use of what's your revenue. There can be different ways of calculating that, but that's what we go by. So any questions on the audit?
You say org link, so is that link in the application that you submit? Or do you mean
Yes.
like on our website?
So, and thank you for asking that. Like some of our school districts have huge audits that would be like 300 pages if they printed them out. So what they do for us is just on a piece of paper, a link, here's the link where you can find the audit, and they turn that in on a in lieu of the audit, here is the link where you can find it. They just spell that out on a piece of paper for us. Yep. Great question. That's fairly new. We've kind of been okay with that, but we never told people we were okay with that. So tried to make that a little bit clearer this year. And I can't believe, see how many times you'll go through and review, we peer review this stuff too, and I can't believe that 900. I'm gonna put that on my notes right now for next year. We do ask for a copy of your board of directors with your board meeting dates and times for the upcoming year. And again, that's intended to know that good governance is happening. This is new this year. We are asking for 501c3s to provide a copy of your registration with the Kentucky Secretary of State. We provide the link where you can go look that up. It's really pretty easy. All you do, if I can move my mouse. You just put in your organization's name, and it will pull up for you the page that if you can just print that off for us, it shows this is what we're looking for, is just to make sure you're in good standing with things like payroll taxes and different legal certifications. We don't need necessarily, there's all these different reports and things that can be attached to that. We don't need those, but what we just need is a printed, if you just print this page, turning that in with your packet would suffice for that requirement. For new applicants, we need a copy of your IRS determination letter. If you're currently funded, we've got that on file. You don't need to turn it in again. New applicants as well, a copy of your bylaws and the date they were approved by your board, and a copy of your articles of incorporation and the date approved by your board. If you're currently funded, same thing. We've got them from last year. A couple less things you don't have to worry about. We do ask for a copy of the full application with the original signatures. So this includes your budget and your outcomes for each program that is requesting funding, and that application have your original signatures. From there, we need 24 copies of that full application, so that means 25 total. That's always a question, and I'm not really sure, it's so hard to make it clear in a checkbox format, but basically we're looking for 25 so we can hand them out directly to our reviewers. One of those just needs to have your original signatures. We also, and this is the hard part to explain, so when you are turning in your packet, this is what we'll be looking for, is to make sure if you applied as one agency for 2 programs, you need outcomes and a program outcome proposal for each of those 2 programs, because they could be completely different. They could be, one is something for early childhood, one could be after school, so we need 2 different outcomes to understand the results of each of those programs as if they were completely separate. Likewise with a budget. The way you're going to spend money that you're asking for on one program will likely be completely different from the way you're spending money on a different proposal. Even though you're applying under one application, we still ask for a different budget for every program. So we'll be going through, if we see, okay, they're asking for 4 programs, we're going to make sure there's 4 budgets and 4 outcomes. So just make sure that you do that completely. The way we're asking that you turn those in is in the, I think we, I'm trying to think if we asked this. Yeah, we ask here later, but what we're asking for when you turn in those 24 copies, if you can collate having your copies of your application with your budget, with your outcomes, rather than, sometimes we have folks that turn in like, here's a copy of, here's 25 budgets, here's 25 outcomes. If you can have that as ready as possible, that would be a huge, huge help, because that's what turns us into a frenzied craziness is that we had to go through last year especially, and it was great. I think everybody was trying to make it easy for us to check by, here's 25 of this, here's 25 of that. It does make it a little bit easier when we're screening it to be able to just to separate it that way, but it's going to be a lot easier if you could go ahead and just have it all in that packet. So that way there's literally 25 copies of everything in one batch that we can divide up a little bit easier.
I never know whether to staple or paperclip. Is there a preference?
You don't have to get fancy. No, there's really not. We've had some folks like bring it in folders and like bound. I just wouldn't spend your money on that. We give them out, we just give them a stack of them so they don't go in binders or anything necessarily. I just say whatever's, it seems like paper, if it was me, I'd just do paper clip, because then if something happens and you're like, oh, I had a typo on this page, and you have to unstaple stuff. So that might be just something to think about. I've seen that happen where we're unstapling pieces to add in a different page at the last minute with folks, so that might help. But
I never know.
yep. We're not, the day we get that bad where we tell you to that level of detail.
I've had funders say that. Oh, I do not staple.
Or stapled top left corner only.
Yes. Yes. We don't want to be that guy. There's a few things, we deal with federal funders. We deal with some of that ourselves, and I think we're pretty committed to, if there's a reason that we need it, we'll at least let you know, like, here's why. But from my perspective of what we're going to do is put these in a bunch of bags, and we're not that nice where we don't buy. I'm guessing those folks maybe binder them. We don't spend that money on that, so we don't have a preference there. I just wouldn't. I've seen a couple come in like really nice, and I'd save your money. It's not gonna help probably from a standpoint of a decision one way or the other. We do ask for a year-end operating statement of your financial position, also included in each of those 25 copies, so rather than a separate stack. For coalitions, just letters of support from your partner members. If anybody a coalition applicant where you'd like multiple agencies to work with you. We just need a letter of support if you're saying we're all going to do this. It just says, yes, we all are agreeing we're going to do this. The biggest thing that really has helped us over the last few years is, and this might be also why they say don't staple, is we used to have to hand scan all of these into our system, which takes forever. So if you could electronically email a copy to our impact@UnitedWayCK.org email of your application, your outcomes, your budgets, and letters of support, If you can email that to us, and really if you have any of those other documents electronically and you want it, that's fine too, because that's actually helping us build a library of what we have on file and where. But at least what we need to be able to review the proposals, because what we'll do is also make them available electronically for our CIT members. Most of them do like they like to write notes on them, they like them in hard copy, but we will make those available on a secure access only for those members. We do make that available for them. So if you can email that, it just saves us so much time of having to that was just this fun story. I can tell you about how we used to have to do that. So it saves us a lot of time.
When you email those electronically, do you want those as a one complete packet, or do you like all the components separately?
We're not that picky. Yeah, whatever. Everybody's going to do it differently, no matter what I say. So as long as it helps if you, like in the file name, if you say like budget, outcomes, application, and your agency name, that helps us, just so when we're putting them together, we know, okay, everything's here. But yeah, everyone's going to do that probably differently, and we can make it a big to-do for everyone to do it the same way, but I don't think it really saves us much time or anything on our end. So until that day happens, however is easiest for you guys. We do ask for a copy of the Memorandum of Agreement, which includes the supplemental fundraising policy and anti-terrorism agreement. We legally can't fund terrorism, nor do we want to, so sounds silly, but we have to verify that the dollars are not being used that way. So I'll show you what that looks like here in just a minute. Just highly recommend, again, reviewing your application for completeness. Do you have a separate outcomes for each program? Is anything missing? Did you have your certifying official, if that's your CEO, your executive director, is that signed? Sometimes that's just FYI on the timeline. If you need anything like this to be approved by a board, or sometimes that can cause a scramble at the last minute. If I needed this presented at a certain meeting, I needed to make sure it's on your agenda as soon as you can, just to make sure that that doesn't hold it up. And at the end, we'll do a separate check. Highly, highly recommend and ask that you go through this first column here and do the check before you bring it in. And then United Way will sign off and check the boxes as we go, and we're looking through everything. And at the end, we will copy this for you and give it back to you, so you get to know, hang it up on your wall, turn it into your boss, whoever was the one that's like, did it get taken? You will have proof that, yes, you turned it in, we said it was good, we're gonna pass it on our end. At that point, go out and have a drink, have a nice dinner, celebrate a little bit. That's the proof that that's all taken care of. So any questions on physically, like what to turn in or what you need to be eligible? Okay, from the application, I'll go into the MOA. Like I said, I like to, here's all the deal breakers. So again, if you're like, this is so not what I thought it was, it's not gonna hurt my feelings if like there's a deal breaker we found in here. But I like to go through all the upfront stuff before we get into the application. So if it's okay with you all, we'll go to the Memorandum of Agreement so you can see what that looks like. And again, this is done through our website. Okay, so you've got both of these things at the bottom here. Our Memorandum of Agreement for our current partners, this has stayed really the same pretty much from year to year. We actually loosened up a couple things on it this year. I'll show you here in a minute. Okay, our 2016 Memorandum of Agreement just outlines kind of who's in what position, the timeline that we're operating on in terms of what the grant year looks like. So that's June 1st to end of May. Kind of who agrees to what. Again, I can read this all to you, but it's probably not the best use of your time. You're all very smart folks that the things I'm going to highlight are the things that I think you might want to think about or take under consideration. But typically, I think most of the stuff is pretty standard in terms of an agreement of this kind. In here, you also have a reminder of what that change to the audit policy is, And again, if you don't have it in hand when you've never had one before, but you meet those guidelines, you still can apply. You just have to have that done sometime in the next year. So you might want to take that into account in budgeting. Okay, so the thing that we ask, here's kind of things that we ask of agencies outside of your traditional good governance, explanations of who's in what role. Things that make United Way agreements unique is that first we ask our partners, our agencies, to run an effective United Way campaign internally, including a presentation with your board of directors or other key volunteers, with the intent, likely this won't be the way that we raise, that additional $1 million that we're needing, but really we're looking for an opportunity to explain the partnership to folks that maybe we haven't worked with before or that don't know what United Way does, which you would probably be surprised how many folks, even current granted agencies, maybe the executive director or a staff person writes and administers the grant, but a whole other arm of the organization really has no idea how these dollars are impacting your work. So what we're looking for is not success from a dollar standpoint, but it is an opportunity that it is important for us that if we have agencies that really go above and beyond to get us in front of great groups, we don't want to, if that's something we're asking and agencies are putting a lot of effort into, we don't want this to be a burden. We provide all the materials, we provide any kind of training and guidance that you need, but if an agency is doing that for us, we also want to make sure that that is being upheld across the board. So we're not penalizing agencies for complying by not asking that other folks do that uniformly. So what that looks like in terms of agencies that are all volunteer, that have more of a regional basis or are headquartered outside of our service area, those things can kind of tweak how we deliver that on the local level, and that's fine with us. We're very flexible as to how to work in any of those cases. But I think the question that sometimes happens as well, we're all volunteer, our employees can even give through payroll deduction, so that means that we don't need to do that. But from our perspective, you still have volunteers, you have a board, just is there somebody that we can talk to? Because really the limiting factor for our work is personally, and have a vested interest, but we have so many great things happening, and usually folks just have no idea how many different services, answers to most questions and things I always wondered about. It's so much more effective if we can have those conversations in person rather than buying paid advertising or trying to push that out just through social media or any of the other channels we have for those kinds of conversations. It's just the data that we see on fundraising is, you all probably know, there's nothing like in-person conversations with people that can possibly help open new doors in communities or help us connect more with a new network than we're currently reaching through our workplace campaigns, which we know are just the tip of the iceberg. So that's really what we're looking for, is to get in front of folks, and anything you can do to help us with that opportunity would really be appreciated. You do have the opportunity to, our funded programs are an option for designations. So that's what a lot of our agencies do when they run a campaign, is actually, if they do donate on a financial level, and again, the opportunity is what we're looking for. So that's our measure of success. But if an agency does, their employees give, a lot of times that will just be designated right back to the agency. And those are first dollars in, so they're guaranteed. It's not a fund on top of your grant request, but it's those first guaranteed dollars that even if you don't fund or you don't write the grant application and you receive designations of over $1,000 total to a non-funded program, we would still pass those through. So that's an option that a lot of our partners take. Other larger amounts, we have a couple, 70, 80,000. The largest first grantee, like new applicant requests I've seen, I think we had one that was about 40,000 and received, it was a year. The guidance I can always give is every year is different. Some years there will be more opportunities to take on new partners at a higher level. And this was one of those years where kind of the stars aligned, and that ended up with I think high 30s, low 40s in terms of award. That was much more of a unique occurrence though than a typical, a lot of our newer partners. Ones last year, like that's where I forgot Breck Schools was new for their preschool program. This year, that was slightly under 5,000. Breckenridge County Schools preschool, that was new. Brett Grayson programs had applied a few years before, but last year that was essentially, I think you can consider that a new request. Those were new programs we were funding.
Megan, do you know how much this is available this year to give out?
I don't yet. So kind of what happens, that's a great question. I went over with the other group. So United Way, there's the grant, how much you raise in the campaign. Here's your campaign total. We'll talk about that publicly once we get into March. Here's how much was raised. So how do we get from that to what we can grant out? There are different restrictions that we have on that revenue, things like if it's designated to another United Way, because we have that reciprocity with like if you live in Nelson County and you said, I want my money to go to that United Way, well, we can't spend it. So we put through designations to other United Ways. We hold back those dollars that are designated to current partners or that meet that $1,000 threshold for any other Save the Whales. We always pick on Save the Whales. So if there's designations that we legally need to honor, obviously we can't spend those as an organization. Sometimes, and this was the case last year, where we had a higher overall campaign, but we had more restrictions. One of those came from an investment to help United Way seed an endowment and develop a Step Up Tocqueville program. So again, it was a contribution through the campaign, but it wasn't money that we had unencumbered that we could grant out. So those things kind of can be sometimes expected, sometimes unexpected. So those kinds of factors as well can play in. We also have something called pledge loss. So we don't grant out every dollar that people say that they're going to give through the course of the year because, as you know, you might have pledges that are hard to collect. And in our world of workplace campaigns, if you have somebody that leaves their employment and usually if you quit a job or you leave without planning that, usually the first thing you're thinking of is not, I need to make sure I continue, that my new employer picks up my payroll deduction. A lot of the times that can get lost in the shuffle. So there's several different things that we basically have to hold aside and go into that pool of what do we have left at the end of that process. Typically, last year it was about 850,000. Typically it ranges mid 800s, lowish 900s, up to about 900 is about as much as I've seen in the last few years. So that's always our hope, and that's why we ask for that undesignated gift. It really is the most powerful because then the CIT can have more latitude as to how to apply that against the proposals. But that's really kind of why we don't yet know, is we're still getting all of that data in, and with about over 4,000 individual donors, we have to go through all of that data and we're doing that now, is pulling out what we can and can't spend. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Great question. I'm trying to think see if there's any other fairly new programs. Early Childhood Council, that was a first-time request. Some of the early childhood ones were smaller than normal because we had so many requests for a common outcome around screening for early childhood and identifying children who were behind on a much earlier time frame. So since we had a lot of uniformity, we were able to implement this more common intervention across all of our counties through multiple different providers. So that's why typically one of the things I'm really proud of is that we usually give much larger grants. Like a 5,000 is more uncommon typically than something, let's say 10 or up. But given that change to our priority work last year and being able to move forward with that screening tool, that's I think what resulted in some of these that are smaller than I would typically see. And as you'll notice as you look through here, they're mostly in education where some of those smaller grants are happening. But highly recommend looking through here when you get a moment. I'll hop back into the MOA. The other thing that we ask as part of that storytelling effort is we will host through our annual campaign. We have done over 150 meetings so far this year. We'll likely reach, I'd say, at least 175 could be 200. So in every one of those meetings, we have a United Way representative, and as we try to find as someone is directly impacted by those dollars as possible. So whether it's a client, a volunteer, like CASA sent a great one of your CASA volunteers came, and those are some of the best meetings I was at. I'm like, I'm just gonna shut up, because this is exactly where your dollars are going, and this is what we're trying to do. She was just fabulous. So we try to bring in somebody that can tell that story with us to any one of those meetings. So that could be you personally. We'll provide some training on, like, what do you want me to say? How do I talk about this? What does this United Way relationship look like? We will provide that training, but having somebody, or ideally a couple people that have gone through that we can call on, because as you can imagine, with 150 to 200 meetings in 5 different counties, we have I think we got like a 6:15 we're trying to be at this week. We have them at all, we had a 2 a.m. this year. We do them at shift changes, so they're all a different time. Not that we will always call on you to be the 6 a.m. person, but just the more people we have in that bench, the easier it is for everybody, where we're not calling on the same folks to be at every single meeting. We do ask that you provide program-related information in a timely manner, so we can do our communications on the other side, and that comes through your reporting. We do still ask that you identify somebody with a great success story that could be part of our marketing materials, potentially our campaign video. We used to have every program featured in our video, and we had to kind of get away from that, because now we have, that was a little easier. I think when I started, we were at like 18 agencies, and now we're at 24, so it just was going to be really difficult for us to keep going that direction. So as many people with success stories that you can share with us, that would be wonderful, but we ask at least for somebody that you can kind of point us in their direction for different marketing purposes. If you are planning on expanding services, this is definitely not something we ever want to stand in the way of your growth. But we've seen a couple cases where we are actually able to help an agency or program move into a new county, because we had some relationships there. So that's where we just like to be able to ask you to, if you're thinking about this, let us know. Let's work on it together, and think of how we can position it in a way that might help you be more successful. So we just like to know about that before we just good general guidance you all probably know already, but it's never surprise your funder. So we'd rather know about it in the process rather than read about it in the paper, is what we're getting at there. Let's see, submitting your quarterly reports. We have the schedule here again, and we'll also provide more training on that. This is the mention of the Agency Advisory Committee. Again, that's a quarterly meeting. This is one of those things that would be great if we could release times and locations at this point in the year. Just a little bit tricky for us to know what's going to work in terms of a location and schedules for that group until we get a little bit closer. And we do take into account what the group wants. We have a chair of the committee who is an ex officio member of our board of directors, and Julia is kind of an interim for us in that capacity right now, actually, as our prior chair has moved to a different position, and she was our co-chair. So thank you to Julia, because that voice of, as we're talking about things in her predecessor, was great as a support to us when we were having that conversation about the audit as a board. We wanted to make sure we were listening to that perspective. So those are really great decisions that when we can make those with all the facts at hand, that's why we try to include that representation on our leadership. The change that I mentioned earlier is in regards to our loaned executive program for agencies receiving, used to be $25,000 in grant funds. Now we've changed it to $40,000. And what I mean by a loaned executive, it's going to be old news to some of you guys, but a loaned executive in United Way terms, typically across United Ways, is someone that helps us during the annual fundraising campaign. We essentially will give you, here's several different companies. Your job is to connect with their employee campaign manager, make sure they're trained, they have all their materials, they're going to run an effective and coordinated campaign, collecting those materials at the end, making sure their meetings happened, reporting totals, and things like that, which again, we provide training on this, so before it's like, oh my gosh, I have no idea, like what does an effective campaign look like? I don't even know that. That's okay, we take care of that piece with you. We give you the assignment of the company. We try to take into account any companies you might have a relationship with or know people at, or your dad you worked at back in the day. We try to take that into account and give you some points of contact and a reference there to be able to help open that door. But essentially, those 100 and some meetings I mentioned, typically the bulk of those are managed by staff, and that's our biggest challenge, is trying to be in all of these different companies in such a short period of time, that having the support from a loan executive lets us do so much more on a fundraising standpoint. Now, where the change came is obviously we went to a higher threshold for the grant award in terms of whether or not that was something we asked of you. Actually, we saw some agencies that were like always applying for like $24,900 right under that threshold, because they just didn't have the capacity to be able to meet that ask of us. So we never want to stand in the way of an agency or program asking for what they really need to deliver those results because of United Way. We never want to be an obstacle. We want to be a facilitator. So we will do as much as we can on the staff side to be able to make that happen and recruit volunteers and do the things that we need to run an effective campaign. But also know that you as agencies, we don't want this to be too much of a burden or a barrier for you. So we moved that direction this year. And a kind of an outline of what that means is included in here. The campaign, typically, if you're thinking about, does this impact me, timeline is typically August through end of February. So really the bulk of it, know that can sometimes hit at a heavy time for end of year giving. So just something to think about if you're planning to request $40,000 or more. Any partner of United Way, we ask to follow our branding requirements. We have all of our logos and things available on our website for download. And there's some requests here of how United Way be either mentioned, preferably as United Way of Central Kentucky, because good, bad, or otherwise, we're all actually independent. So receiving United Way funds from another community, that's wonderful, but the more we can do to help folks locally understand that this is where their dollars are going in their community, that really helps us identify as an organization and with our supporters. If you don't have materials for our current partners, just so you know, we're going to be doing a reach out to all of our current grantees and making sure that things like if our logo's on websites, what do you need from us? Can we get it to you? Do you need yard signs? Do you need decals? We'll have someone either from our team or one of our volunteers that's in our marketing committee helping reach out to make sure that we're, again, we don't want to penalize. We have some agencies that are just above and beyond, get great mentions at their fundraisers, just things that, and really costly. You guys are one of them that just always is out promoting that partnership, even like when I'm at your stuff, and I'm not expecting this to be about United Way in any way, shape, or form, and all of a sudden we hear like, oh yeah, we're here because of United Way. Like that's wonderful and unexpected, but we also don't want it to hold it against an agency that's doing that kind of work if it's not being followed across the board. So we've been, I think, pretty flexible with this in the past, and we'll always still have that the agency perspective in mind, but we'll be doing some reaching out just to make sure that everybody has the tools they need to be able to comply with this. The supplemental fundraising policy, if anybody has been around United Way, has anybody heard about the blackout period or been deterred by the blackout period in the past? Okay. So this is what we meant by this blackout, where there were things that we actually didn't let you do very much, if any, fundraising during our campaign. And that runs from our definition, September 1st through October 30th. Those are kind of our peak months. We used to not let any special events happen. Back in 2013, we changed that, loosened it up. Basically, here's all the things that you can do. You can do special events. Again, with that, please, let's co-brand. Is there any way we can co-brand this? Is there any way we can, again, not pull attention away from that? Really, the campaign is supposed to be for our donors. That's where United Way started, was running one campaign that's going to impact multiple agencies, make it easier on the community, and eliminate everybody feeling like they're tapped out constantly, which is still something we hear from our donors. So trying to do as much as we can to team up where people can participate in that unified giving effort that the campaign provides. But if you do host a special event, that is, we had a couple agencies that really couldn't apply because their main source of revenue was happening during that time. And again, we never want to be a barrier for resources that are going to help achieve the outcomes that are needed. So we've gotten much more flexible there. You can still do investments, grants, pretty much anything. The only things that we ask really that you not do during this time, ever for any United Way partner, we ask that you not go into the workplace and ask for payroll deduction. That's just a conflict in terms of business models. So we ask that of any time outside of the blackout policy included, that you not be fundraising in the workplace in that same business model. We do ask that you not do direct mail solicitations during that time, and I had a great question, and the other one was like, well, can we still send newsletters? And you can still, we're never going to say don't communicate your work with donors, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. We understand how important that is, but if you can refrain from doing a mass, like here's your envelope to send your donation, doing a mass mail campaign, September, go green light as of end of October, go forth and conquer at the holidays, but refraining from doing that during the blackout period. That's really the only thing that's explicitly prohibited now by the policy.
And that refers only to the 5 counties that you serve?
Yes, outside there, we're not going to tell you what to do other places. Okay, yeah, solicitation of employees through group meetings for direct financial support of any funded partners in conflict with principles of United Way and therefore prohibited. So that's really the only other thing that's year-round. We just ask that you not do. There's here's how to appeal this. If you have questions, I'll try to the best of my ability. Again, I won't tell you what to do, but I'll say, here's kind of how I interpret this in my really amateur legal background. But certainly we'll do the best I can to advise that way. I think the rest is pretty self-explanatory. So any other questions on the memorandum of agreement? Okay, I want to make sure we get enough time to get into the application here. So I will walk through first the new applicant, the shorter form. So you can see it's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, we're asking pretty easy stuff. Your agency or coalition name, your EIN number, which that's on your, typically your letter, your IRS determination letter, typically on there. Contact information for several different folks, who's your ultimate CEO or your executive director, or if you are, whoever is the person that's managing these programs directly. So sometimes that's also the CEO or your director, but if you have a different director who has more information about those programs, if you could include that for us. If your program serves, letting us know which counties they serve, as well as the actual names of the program, and you can just click on any of these that say click here to enter text, and just letting us know how much funding you're requesting up front for each program before we get into the actual questions about that. Before you worry too much about checking these boxes about which category you fall in, I'll kind of circle back to this when we look at the outcomes piece. But to check a box, all you do in Microsoft Word is double click on it, and you can change it to checked. So I'm in transportation now. If you have any technical issues with that kind of thing, feel free to give us a call, but hopefully we try to make it as easy as possible where this kind of computes for different systems and those kinds of things. As I mentioned, you have 4 different opportunities to apply for funding, 4 different programs. A brief description of your agency or your coalition's mission, describing the problem that the program will address. So if you have multiple programs, would recommend responding as it relates to each program. So if you have something job training related, obviously the need for that is gonna be very different than I also need to get people to work and they need help with transportation. The need for transportation versus the need for job training, those are gonna be two very different needs. So please respond as it relates to each program. Describing what you're using the money for, that's always like, that's the thing. If the CIT can understand what you're asking for and what the clear picture, here's what they need, here's what they're gonna use the money for. I know that sounds like it's really easy, but that's the thing that seems like we usually get stuck in conversations is where are the dollars, really what do you need? Where are the dollars going that you're asking for from us? So explaining what they'll be used for. At this point, you don't have to do a budget. Again, this is just that new summary. If it's going to be used for, the one thing typically, just as a caveat, we don't typically provide funding for capital expenses. So like I need to build on a new wing of my facility, or I want to buy a bunch of vans. Those things, you can still ask for it, but typically we've shied away from more capital expenses, prefer to be on a more programmatic basis. So you can still ask for support for staff, supplies, those kinds of things. We don't restrict staff and supply costs.
I was getting ready to say, what about salaries?
We like that we pay for salaries because you people are important. This is Megan's opinion, but I think it's also United Way opinion is that we need to support people that are doing the work needed to make these programs possible, and that at some level we do look at how much you're asking, and that's why we look at the financials and why we look at the big picture to make sure that it's not 90% of funds aren't going to administrative costs and those kinds of things. But it is my personal opinion is that the nonprofit community, we really need good qualified people that can do this work that is so challenging, and that you need to be able to have the infrastructure from a staff and organizational component to be able to support that. And we learned a lot. Actually, this was one of those great conversations with the CIT that one of our applicants used last year, and actually said, like, do you realize you're one of two options we have to fund my position? And we didn't know that. We know, through my position, I know how hard it can be to find those grants that will pay for people to do the work. But our CIT was amazed of like, oh my gosh, that's the question we're always trying to get at is if we don't do this, who else can? Is there someone else that can pick this up? And when we clearly saw, wow, that we're really actually getting a great return on our investment for this program that's leveraging millions of dollars in funds, and we can provide that person when nobody else can, that's what we want to be able to support. So we don't have a requirement on how much you can use ask for what you need. It's generally my guidance. We don't have anywhere in here that says here's how much you can only spend in certain categories. And I will hope we never get to that point. We don't want to ever tie your hands when it comes down to delivering the service. Describing your target population. So who are you hoping to help with this kind of service? What does that person look like when they come into the program, and what are you trying to essentially do to change that? Not only who are you trying to target, but what's your plan? That's the piece that I think is important. Here's who we're trying to reach. How are you going to reach them? Are you already in contact with them through other programs? Do you have a specific way? The more you can do to help us understand, yes, this is likely to be possible, because we've seen it. We've all probably seen programs that like, this sounds great, but actually getting people to participate can be a challenge and a barrier. So as much of a clear picture as you can paint for us on, yes, we know we can deliver this outcome to this specific group based on this plan. That would be really helpful. Helping us understand how it aligns with United Way. So looking back at that welcome packet and, is this helping us achieve one of those outcomes we're working towards? Its relation to poverty kind of comes into play here in that next question. So we can think a little bit longer term with how what you're doing is going to relate into that more preventative piece. Just helping us understand why United Way? Why do you think this is a good fit for this particular partnership? That's all we're really asking up front. Is that comfortable? Any questions on that? Again, these are exact questions taken out of the full application. So if you can take them back into the full one and tweak them slightly if you need to, but it's, we didn't want you to have to reinvent the wheel if the full application gets the green light. Okay, so that's the new piece. The full application, the front page looks exactly like that. There's a little bit of a box here for us when it's coming in. We process it a little differently than when you're sending the other one in through email. So same questions, you've already got a leg up. The only things that are different here is we do ask you for, if there's a person that's a financial representative, like your treasurer or an accountant, or just somebody that if there's more specific financial questions, that when we're doing that more in-depth review of audits and things like that, that if there's questions that we know who that person is and can contact them. Coalition, who that fiscal agent is, so we can make sure that's ready to go. But we're back to still some check boxes. We have a couple more here just to make you remember, I need to have a separate budget and outcomes or performance measures proposal for each program. We try not to beat you over the head, but we just want to make sure you have as many opportunities to not forget something like that as possible. Understanding of the audit requirement. And we make you check a box to say you've got a copy of another list of boxes to check. Until there's the better, if you guys think of a better way to do that, please tell me. I just every year I'm like, this is ridiculous. But we used to have all of those checklist things were actually like separate boxes on the application. It was really confusing of like, it was just confusing. So hopefully it's not terribly confusing still. It might be now slightly silly, but just having that as a separate list of things that you're turning in and understand with that submission process. So we're asking up front, just tell us how bad it's going to be. What's the ask? And if you received funds last year, how much did you get at a glance from that last year's award? Good news is you've got a couple questions already knocked out here by the time you've gone through that first review process. We are asking for, if you have your program at multiple sites, so like in our schools are a great example. If they operate the Cradle School program, which schools it is actually at. So again, when we get those hundreds of calls a year, and if somebody's calling looking for, this is what I need, we can tell them the options that are closest to them potentially. And it helps us also kind of map out, are we missing a group, or where our service is actually being delivered. So this is if it's reasonable. Now, like Feeding America, they distribute food to dozens and dozens of agencies. We probably don't need it if it's going to be like a whole other page of different locations. So just if you have hubs where your services are happening, that helps us to know locally. We've got community needs. We've already talked about that. The thing I'll also kind of circle back to on this is the statistics. The more you can give us current information and also information that's specific to your need. Sometimes we see a lot of like, there's so many kids living in poverty and that's why we need this particular program. Sometimes that can be a little bit of a leap of like, well, if you're asking for something on child abuse, which is, I hate to say a perfect example, that's not a good thing that we want, but the child poverty rate, that might not be the only, go ahead and include it, but that might not be the most compelling data for that particular need for your program. So that's where numbers of, here's the kind of abuse and trends you're seeing, and this is a great opportunity to really argue for that specific need. So the more you can be related to the actual program and how that's going to tie in, rather than sometimes I've seen like some leaps that need to be made where we're trying to understand, well, how is this all connected? So the clearer you can be on that, it really helps us. Because again, you're talking to people who might not understand how that implication happens. Target population, bacterias. We've already talked about all of those. Some things that are kind of new to the process this year is asking some questions about your organization's capacity to support the program. This was a question from last year, but I think it's still really important for us to understand how we know from comparing across nonprofits that are national backing or membership organizations that have a higher level of oversight, to all volunteer. This is a chance to explain. We don't hold that against anybody, but it helps us to understand how your operation works, so we can ensure that the service will be delivered to the clients. Describing your internal controls. The next 3 questions are new on the kind of side of wanting to make sure that we can entrust that the donor's wishes will be upheld. So that means things like United Way, for example, when we do fundraising out in a workplace, we have a system of 3 counts of those dollars: a count when it happens at the company, a count when somebody goes to pick it up, and a count when it gets back here to the office. So basically, if a company says, I have $2,000 in cash from a Jeans Day that we held, that there's not opportunities anytime that cash could mysteriously turn from $2,000 to like $1,000. Any chance that could be happening, that's why we have it counted by three different points to make sure it's not filtering out by the time it gets to us. So things like that, I know it's kind of a unique example, but even if you have like check signers who don't sign your own checks is a good a good rule. If you have multiple signatures required for checks over a certain amount, any kinds of controls like that. At the very least, also gonna be really great for us when we're doing some training and we know like this agency has great controls. Teach us all how we can be better about that. On a personal side, we had an attempted cyber attack to get funds fraudulently through United Way. Our internal controls caught it. So nothing, we had to freeze some things. It was an inconvenience, but nothing was, that attempt did not work and will never work with us because we have controls in place. So things like, it can happen to anybody. So that's where we're coming from in making sure that you can't account for every possible situation, but making sure that we're all operating with that worst case scenario in mind. If you have certification or membership standards for your agency or program, are you in good standing or compliant with those rules? And the good side here is if you're not currently in compliance, because sometimes we understand there's change that happens at an agency, maybe a former director like this, they weren't meeting this standard, that was maybe the reason for the separation, that issue's being addressed now. We're not gonna totally not listen to that request because of that kind of a change or circumstance, but we just need to know what the plan is, having some documentation at this point. Usually we don't ask for give us more things to look at. Usually this is really the only piece that if you can prove also that here's our copies of, if you have a childcare component to an after-school program, here's where we're licensed to do this. This is where you can actually get creative with the things that you attach, as well as if you are not in compliance, here's what your plan is, and anytime you have like a board agreement on what that plan looks like, this is the time to really showcase what you're doing to try to address that. If you're anticipating any changes in your leadership, whether from a staff or volunteer, if you're all volunteer run, what are your plans to ensure, again, our end goal here with this kind of a question is help us know that no matter what happens at your agency, we're investing in this specific outcome and result. How do we know that that's going to be able to happen? So again, you can't cover every contingency, but if you're planning on anything like that, or if you're not and you have this great succession plan, or you have all these different committees, and how is this not centralized within one person, anything you are doing on that, go ahead and celebrate that story. You always have, most grant applications, we're looking for understanding what you're trying to do to support the program outside of United Way. I think 14 is a great, if agencies that can really address this question will be very successful in the CIT when it comes down to those conversations. If this is, yes, the program, yes, it's the outcome, it's all the things that we want. The issue that usually they have is, can we, if we can't fully fund it, back to that issue of if we're providing staff especially, if we can't fully fund that employee, is it better to give them nothing, or is it better to, if we can't fully fund it, should we just not give them anything because they're not going to be able to hire an employee with, a $5,000 award as opposed to 20. So this is where, again, you probably can't like give a table for exactly what you would do with every single different dollar amount, but helping the CIT understand how that, if you could adapt it at all, maybe you can't, and that's okay, but just helping them understand, that seems to be the sticking point that we can get into sometimes of, yes, we like it, we just don't have, for whatever reason, we can't fully go there. What could you do with, it helps us have those conversations of knowing if there's any other options other than full funding. So this is where you could say, all right, well, if we get half the money, we would move this person to part-time, they would handle this many cases, they'd be able to help this many clients, just helping us understand kind of what the scaled proportion would be at a few different, there's a couple other options you could take of certain percentages, but helping us understand what you would do to kind of scale if you'd be able to adapt funding if the full request isn't met. Okay, I'm going to just skip the results point for just a minute. I'll come back to how to complete the outcomes piece. A question I always get is, if you need to submit that as a separate document, that's okay. It doesn't have to physically be inserted in this section of the application as long as it's in that packet. We don't want to make this the cut and paste Olympics of like, I couldn't get it to format right, and you can put it here, you can still keep it as when you turn it in. It can be electronically, it can be a separate document when you email it in. I think to that question earlier, that's okay, but if you want to insert it here, that's great, it's all in one place, but just make sure it's in that packet instead of in a separate stack later. We're asking some questions about methodology, so how shortly you'll be proposing, here are the results we're going to achieve. What are you using to do that? How do we know? Is it a computerized system? Is it handwritten? What kind of, are you doing pre and post tests? What are your methods for knowing whether or not this change has happened? What research or evidence? That's something that you've made the case for your need, that there's a need for this program, but helping us understand, and here's how as United Way that this approach that we're going to take, here's how this is showing other people have tried it, here's something backing up that this approach is going to likely lead to those results. Does that make sense? If you received funding last year, provide an update on your program. So have you met your goals? It's at this point we know you might not have because it's not the full year, that's okay. But the question I get on this is, well, can I use stuff, if you've done it in your quarterly reports, you can use that here. The full CIT looks at your numbers as they progress throughout the year, but they are not reading all of the quarterly reports. So if you've got some awesome things going on, just don't assume that all of the CIT knows it because you put in a quarterly report. So this is a great chance to say, here's how things are going. We haven't met this target because this is what's happening. Again, they're very flexible people. I think they just want an understanding of if there was something you promised last year and it wasn't able to be delivered, understanding what factors came into play there. Question about how you involve clients in your service delivery or in the development of your program. If you don't, that's okay, but how could you? Thinking of how you could move to something that takes the needs of the client into account. An example of what this could look like would be there are some food distribution programs, for example, that clients that are being helped actually participate in the distribution. So it's not just come wait in line, but they're actually helping the other families or using clients as mentors to other clients. There's some different ways that seeing the client not just as this person that needs fixed, but seeing what they do bring to the table, and some more information on that kind of asset-based approach. It's called asset-based community development, was part of that training that we did with the results-based accountability. Some more information and some ideas of what that looks like are back on that resources and training page. But really, I think that's the method and the philosophy that we have at United Way is how can we leverage the assets that everybody's got a talent, everybody's got a gift. How do we leverage that in a way that's going to be not only meaningful for them, but also beneficial for you and your program? So you don't have to be committed yet to doing all those things, but if you are, great, tell that story, but be at least thinking about how you can move in that direction. The most fun part that everybody likes is question 19 about providing some success stories. So this is the part, make them cry, make them remember them. Use different stories from year to year so that we know that there's been some kind of positive change. The longer term, I think the challenge here sometimes is if you're applying for a newer program, maybe you don't have as long-term impact to show, but if you do, even a current participant, the change you've seen over the last few months, really those folks that show, we all have them, because honestly our programs don't work for everybody, at least in my experience. Maybe you're way better at this than I am, but they don't work always for everybody. But those ones that keep you in it, that you're like, yes, it's working, it got to that one, that's the one that gets you out of bed in the morning to know that this is possible. Tell us those stories. Those are the things that we want to hear about. All right, budget, I'm going to just skip over these two final documents that are kind of done separately, and I'll circle back to those. There's a chance in here, and I'll refer to this in a minute, but you can, if you have any explanation to make on your budget, there's some places here which I highly, highly encourage. I don't think applicants use this as much as they could to explain anything that might need additional interpretation in your budget. Collaborations are obviously important to us, and that is the drive behind the questions here about what organizations, I think what sets agencies or applicants apart on this level is not just who you're working with, but how you're working together to improve services for your clients. So, a great program of interagency collaboration, I think, is the Christmas program, where you have multiple agencies coming together to reduce duplication and ultimately with the hope of making it easier on families to have one place, one stop, single point of access to information rather than bouncing them around to different programs. So that's a good example of agencies working together with a common outcome to improve the services of their clients. Is that helpful or make sense? Okay. If you are working with military active duty servicemen or women or retirees, letting us know how that's a component that we've always struggled to, we know veterans and active duty military are using our programs, but we're trying to get a better handle on that as an organization. So anything, even if you're not sure, just telling us anecdotally, like, yes, here's a good estimate, what we think, that's more helpful than kind of the baseline we have right now is a good hunch, and a good hunch isn't really what we need to be about anymore. So anything you can do to help us understand that would be great. Question 22 gives you the chance to celebrate what you've done to support United Way throughout the year. So if you have been doing great on the co-branding and you showcased us at a special event, if you've been working with us to host volunteers or any other kinds of collaboration. These are things that we typically know at United Way as staff, but again, this is a chance to let the CIT know, here's some great things that you're showing that you already, we have that assurance that we know the partnership is likely to be strong because of some other things. I don't think it puts anybody at a disadvantage from a new applicant standpoint, but I think it shows that willingness to work together. Or if you'd also like to incorporate things like Bank On or any of our other programs into things that you're doing with your clients, I think that's a great opportunity to talk about those plans. There's a couple questions specific to coalitions. We can skip over those. We just another reminder about documentation and a reminder about quarterly reports, reminder about the MOA piece, and just a reminder to sign your MOAs. So we try to remind as many places as possible. The pieces that are still left, we've got about 15 minutes, include the budget, which, as I mentioned earlier, is in Excel. You don't need to put anything in any place that's not yellow. We've got math being done for you in different cells that are, my only ask on the budget is please, 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 please don't touch anything that's gray, because we're really trying to help you by doing the math for you, and there's a lot of links between these gray cells. I just need to lock those. I don't know why I didn't this year. Please just don't edit those, but you can, anywhere there is a yellow box, go ahead and let us know if you, like up here at the top, if your fiscal year, what we're kind of operating on this assumption for everyone is that your fiscal year is January 1st, December 31st, so that calendar year. If you're not, honestly, we're not at United Way. We're on an April to March timeline. So that's okay. You don't have to be on our year. We just would like to know what that is. Like right here, I would type April 1st to March 31st in this spot to let them know what the fiscal year is. Your agency name, so we know which application this corresponds to. And then what other sources of income you have for this program. So this is, again, program focused rather than agency focused as much as possible. We've got, you can also add additional, like if there's something that, the budget section is the thing I hate about it, is it's really hard for us to customize it in a way that's going to make sense to every agency. So make liberal use, if you like, of the ability to add and customize. We've done a little bit of that for you in terms of some suggestions here. You know, your different types of direct client expenses, things that are going exactly to that person or client in need would fall under this category. And you have, we ask for what you actually spent on the current, or the, I guess it was the year that just ended, 2015, and then what you're projecting based on, this is exactly what we're asking for. If this is what happens, this is what we're going to do with the money in a comparison to what happened last year. Indirect would include things like your operating costs, your salaries for employees associated with the program, travel, training, if you need to advertise it, anything that's an expense for you to have this program, but that's not going directly to that client. So again, we've got some ideas here for you, but that's something that you would need to customize based on exactly what you're looking for.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
So like, and this is really specific, with us where it's a legal service, where the client service is the lawyer, which is the salary, would that be direct or indirect?
Yeah, good question. I would probably call it indirect still, and that would be a great use of that program, or that Part D continued back in the application where you can say it's on this line item, because to me it's whatever you're physically, it could go in either place. At the end of the day, we just want to make sure it's in there. Okay. So don't leave it out because you're not sure. And to me, it falls, I think, more. It's the cost to operate your program. It's not something, because that's great actually that you have very little direct client cost. Really, what we're paying for then is the infrastructure to be able to provide that, the guidance, which we know isn't free, but that's you don't have additional costs that you're incurring to help that client as another program could. So I would see it falling more into indirect, but feel free to explain that kind of rationale, or here's why we don't have any direct costs in your case. What we're also looking for is we're trying to understand the big picture of the agency's overall income and expenses. So you've got an opportunity to share that here in the last year as well as the future year. And it's going to calculate for you the overall things like what percentage of United Way funding is going to this specific program and agency. That just helps us understand a little bit where we fall in the bigger picture of things. Your per client cost, this is calculated automatically where we're looking for how many clients you served in the most recent fiscal year with the program, as well as what you're projecting to do. So it's okay if you serve clients outside of our area, but specifically we're looking for what's happening here locally. And by county, this is really helpful for us because then we can go back to our supporters and let them know here's exactly what's been happening in your community. Employees, just looking to understand how many employees you have on staff for this program, as well as what you're planning to do from a staffing standpoint. Job categories, looking for, this is for, if you are looking specifically for funding for positions, this is where we're looking for how many positions do you need, what are their, is it a caseworker, is it management, is it more of an administrative support? This is where we're looking for helping us understand what you need in terms of dollars for salaries. So how many positions, what their compensation. So it doesn't need to be a particular, like, here's Megan Stith's salary. Mine's on the 990, so you can go look it up on our website. But it doesn't have to be on an employee level, but just more of what that position is and what your expected compensation would be for that category of an employee.
If we're asking for salaries or a position to be filled, so of course we have to do verification of why we think we need this. So, like UWCK has 4 programs that fit under like 3 different guidelines. So which one would I pick? Which category? Financial stability, basic needs.
Can you make sure I answer that question when we look at the outcomes piece?
Yes.
Because I think, yeah, that would be, like, you need to know what portion of your staff position essentially would be working with, figuring out which program you want to apply for, and then figuring out what kind of staffing support you would need for that. Is that helpful?
Yes.
That's kind of how I would back into it personally. Great, you're almost done with the budget. We do ask for, back to that, we're trying to understand the value that we're leveraging. Which is through anytime you're getting an in-kind support for this program, what we could expect or hope for in terms of volunteer support. If you have donations of, like we had, it was great. One of our food programs actually was able to tell us how much they were able to leverage in donations from farm produce, which was something we're like, we never knew to ask that, but it was something they were able to leverage because of our grant that they were able to get. So, so things like that you would be able to commit as an in-kind support. Again, that just helps us see where the dollars can be stretched the furthest. There's some tips too on if you're having printing issues. Hopefully some tips on how to get that to print correctly will help. And again, you can copy and paste this and insert it into your Word document, but again, that can freak out some different versions of Word. And if you're using a computer from 1982, like I'm sure everybody is, because we have no money for IT stuff, don't make it that much of a burden on yourself. You can make it, just copy it, print it, stick it in the thing when you run the copies. It doesn't have to be physically copied and pasted into that section unless you want to. Some folks are used to it, they like it, that's okay. We just don't want you to lose, this is not the thing to lose sleep over. So last piece is the outcome. So the point of what do I apply for? How do I know which one I fit into? Let's lead, is there anybody, I'll still do education for you guys, because that could be some overlap there. But we'll lead with financial stability, because I think that's where probably most of the interest is today. Okay, so if you are one of those on the matrix of here's the things that we're hoping to achieve, if you feel like you're one of those, there's a couple different ways you can do your outcomes. What I would recommend, like Darla, to your point, is looking here first. What we ask is program name, agency name, again, a reminder of how much funding you're requesting. How many clients are you expecting to serve? Whether or not they all have that end outcome, but purely how many are you expecting to serve in our service area and outside, just so we also have, because we're asking other folks that in other ways, in different methods, so we're trying to ask for common information on some level. Okay, so outcomes. We've got some coding. P is in that pathways, back to reference that pathways matrix. T is in referencing the transportation. If your program does one of these things, I would highly consider using this method to propose your outcomes. So if you are job training on that pathways side, that would be, you can do as many, if your program is like, our program does all of these things, we're also making sure that they get some financial education along the way. If that does multiple ones, great, like go ahead and again tell that story. But each program that's applying for funding needs at least one outcome, so we know what the point of that intervention is supposed to be. This is where all of these things are in the drop downs are coming from that matrix. So again, we've got the P and T coding to make it a little bit easier. If you need to look back at kind of what we mean by that, you can know where to reference. But this is where you can say, okay, well, we're getting them their GEDs or they're getting, some kind of trade certification. This is where you can say, here's what we're going to measure over the course of the next year to know if we're helping people achieve this outcome. And this is where you can propose how many are going to. This doesn't have to mean every single person. If you're that good and every single person who goes into your program comes out at the end with this result, great. But this is where you can also propose a number that you feel like is realistic for your program. So it doesn't have to necessarily be exactly how many were served. This is where you can also, if you're measuring it exactly how we talk about it in that matrix in here, great, go ahead and you can use that definition if you want, just to make it easier. But if you, for example, are doing like a different kind of test, or if you're basically, how are you going to know that this happened? How are you going to measure that? That's where you can propose to us. I think that's what the CIT, it's up to them really to decide, oh yeah, that's a method we're comfortable with versus, no, it's maybe a little bit too extreme from what we were, it's gonna be very difficult for us to see progress across programs and know that this is a sound way of measuring it. So I think people seem to lose the most sleep over this, but I wouldn't let this line, which is also, again, our perfect world definition is in here. I think a lot of folks lose sleep over that and then lose sight of all these other things that you actually are aligning on. So if you need to customize this, you still have that opportunity of how you would physically measure this with your information and your data. Again, you can do, if you have multiple ways of measuring this, go ahead and again, tell that story. You don't have to complete, I think we gave you space for 4. You can copy and paste and do as many. If I gave people more than 4, I would be run out of town of like, you expect us to do all 4. We don't, but if you want to add more, go ahead. We just didn't want to get too crazy on 8 or 10 of these listed and then scaring everybody that you're all supposed to have this many different things you're tracking. So never want you to be hold back from what you're able to do and monitor. So feel free to add as many of those as you feel comfortable with. Did that help at all? Okay, so what I mentioned earlier, when you see in that front page of what do I apply for, like which box do I check, I think starting with one of these documents to figure that out and then going back and, okay, this is where it feels most comfortable for me. Check that box after you've done this piece. It's hard that it's like one of the first things you see and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know. Do this piece first and then kind of circle back there. Sorry guys, and if you need to leave, I've got like 3 minutes left. It always seems like never enough time. Education looks similar, the priority education ones. Same thing, program name, agency name, how much you're asking for, the number of clients in and out of the service area, your outcomes. We've got some early childhood related, hence the coding of EC. Couple on strategic supportive relationships. So feel free to pick which one of these would be the most applicable outcome for your program. The one thing I do have as a request, if you're using one of these uniform outcome templates, if you're doing EC here, like please don't pick a supportive relationships. There is a lot of overlap sometimes, but try, if you're seeing like, I've got one EC here and one SR there, like try to keep that, stick in transportation or stick in the pathways piece. If you're seeing a bunch of different letters at the front, the problem is then you're kind of all over different priorities. So you shouldn't see a lot of differences in those first letters that you're using in the coding process. Does that make sense? Hopefully. So yeah, same thing, leading with what the changes that you're having or hoping to achieve, and then how you're going to, how many you think are going to reach that change, and how you're going to measure it. So very similar. Seems, okay, good, you guys are so smart. That's the scariest piece. So what if you don't? What if you're not early childhood supportive relationships? What if you're not in one of those buckets? It's okay, there's still a place for you, and that comes into play where you can propose what works for you. We refer to this as performance measures. You still will have some outcomes, though, included in this, but we provided a link back to results-based accountability because this is really the template that they provide for this kind of framework. Still looking, same thing like the other guys, agency name, program name. We're looking for how many, same thing as the other folks, how many clients are you going to serve, how many people are actually going to be receiving this service. So how many meals, how many clients. This is same thing, you have to at least have one, something that we can, if you have multiples that you can share with us, but at least one piece completed in each of these quadrants. So that I did have someone ask, can I just do this quadrant? No, that means that you still have to have, like that's a good question. I didn't think of it that way, but no, you do need something. There should be something you're filling out in each of these pieces. Quadrant 2 is a method of ensuring that we can have a great program, but if folks aren't staying in it long enough to be effective, how do we know this program will perform well? So that's where we have some suggested, and these can be customized. This is the power of if you want it to be more open-ended. If you have a different way of showing this, we're open to that. But we've given you some examples of client satisfaction, retention rates, how you're referring folks to different collaborating programs. There's some examples as well in here for you, just to get you some ideas to get started. The biggest questions I always get on this are between quadrant 3 and 4. So 3 being how much change will result, so how many clients are going to achieve your overall goal. So for this, you do need to know, what are you trying to achieve? You want to, in the case of our Bank On program, so many clients are going to open second chance accounts. This is your outcome. This is why you're doing the program in the first place. These number of people that are getting the rent assistance are going to move into permanent housing. That's your reason you're getting out of bed to do this program at all. That's what you're hoping to achieve as your outcome. The piece here is that, again, this doesn't mean necessarily every single person in your program is going to have that outcome. So if you had 100 people that we propose back up here in quadrant 1, say 100 people are going to go through our Bank On program, you can propose 50 are going to come out of it with showing improved knowledge or showing that this change took place. The difference between quadrant 3 and 4 is that here we're asking you to translate that number into a percentage. So that helps us understand, if every single person who walks in your door is also having this happen, it's 100%, that's great. Also might not be conscious of reporting against these outcomes. This will be part of that reporting process out later in the year when you get into if funding is awarded, that's what we're monitoring. You do have the option of changing your numbers if you don't receive that full funding. So we're not saying, okay, you have to do exactly this and we give you a quarter of the funding. There is that revision process that can happen. But just be mindful of don't overpromise something that might not be realistic. So this is where if this was Bank On, we had 100 participants go through the program, 50 of them open that second chance account. Here, this would be an example of 50% of clients will open that account.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, like with us, we don't get enough funding to cover the entire work of the person that's doing it. Mm-hmm. But when I've been reporting on everything that he's done, not just like the $5,000 worth of work, but the entire. Is that what you're looking for? Or are you looking for what exactly $5,000 is going to pay for?
I think so that's almost like a different question than applicate, because that's more on the reporting side of based on what we're providing, what are the results of that funding. Helping us understand what we're getting versus what we could be getting, I think would be good for that point in your reports. But I'm not sure how, do you see my question back of like, is that relative to application or just more on the reporting side?
I guess I'll just talk to you about that.
I think it's more of a reporting question than like where to fit that in the outcomes piece. Because when you're doing your application, and that's still something you could include in your application of, here's what he's done, here's how much you paid for, here's what we could do if you paid more. Using that as a great track record to show. I think that has a place here. I would personally work that in somehow into the application if it was me, but I think how to position that from an outcome standpoint. I think that comes with what your ask is we want this much money for this much time to serve this many clients. I think that comes in with a specific ask from you for the proposal that's different from how to report that should partial funding be awarded. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Great question, though. Any other questions? Really, that's the outcomes. That's the results piece. So that's how everything kind of fits back together. So hopefully it was helpful. And I can stick around. I apologize for going a few minutes over, but really just wanted to give you the big picture, and then this is as focused as it gets. So any other questions that might be helpful for the group? All right. Well, you know where to find everything, UWCK.org. I can certainly send out a link to the group now that I have everyone's emails, send you a copy of our slides from today. But thank you so much. We really appreciate your interest in this to begin with. I know it's a lot of information and probably overwhelming. So if you think of questions after today, feel free to reach out, and we'll be happy to advise through the process and maybe see you in some of our other programs.